Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clarke, joined by Chris Rifer. An eventful 24 hours in Soccer City. Giovanni Savarese and the Portland Timbers have parted ways after an unsuccessful season and the team being on pace to miss the playoffs for the second consecutive year. Gio was the coach of the Timbers for 6 years, had plenty of success, including 2 appearances in MLS Cup and a victory in the MLS's back tournament during the pandemic. A highly successful coach, somebody that was beloved in many ways by fans throughout his years, but obviously the tides shifted in recent years. There was plenty of vitriol about the results that were occurring on the field, and Gio shouldered a lot of that blame from folks in the soccer community. And there were also issues off the field in terms of relationships with players. You had, of course, 3 different public fallings out with players. Eric Williamson toward the end of last season, Aljaž Ivačić earlier this year, and then Santiago Moreno and his transfer request earlier this season. A lot to unpack about the Giovanni Savarese era, one filled with success and heartbreak and disappointment and confusion. But it's over now, and Miles Joseph, the assistant coach for the Timbers, will fill in as the interim coach for the remainder of the season. Chris, initial takeaways as we now move on from the Gio era.
Well, in looking at the Gio era as a whole, I think you summarized a lot of it really well. By and large, a really successful coaching tenure. He stuck around in Portland for 6 years, which is a long time in terms of coaching tenures. I think that was well deserved based on the success that the Timbers had in his first 4 years as coach. Frankly, he proved me wrong a number of times in those first 4 years. And I think you have to look at that and give him a lot of respect for the job that he did with the Timbers. And I agree with you that there are a lot of things that we can sort of dive into over the course of the last 18 months and look at as incidents that kind of led to this result. But I actually think the forest level view of it is fairly simple. He just lost the locker room, and the Timbers didn't make the kinds of changes that in terms of player personnel, they didn't change the locker room enough that you would think he would have a good shot at getting it back. And it's just really, really hard when you kind of lose a group to get them back. And that's not even necessarily to say that Gio did things really super wrong. These are a lot of players, many of whom are sort of in the core of the locker room that he's been coaching for a long time. And when something like this happens, I always think back to a conversation I had a friend in college whose dad was a pastor. And I remember I was talking to their dad at one point and kind of just talking about that job. And one of the things he said that kind of struck me and has always kind of stuck with me about something like this is he said that the thing that he likes least about his job is that he has to move a lot. And it's not that he has to move a lot because he gets reassigned or anything like that. It's that he felt that after a certain number of years with the same congregation, he felt like he'd kind of said what he had to say, and that there wasn't a whole lot else to add, and that his message kind of got stale with the congregation. When that happened, the only real thing to do was to go find a new flock. And I think there's a similar dynamic in soccer coaching. It is rare to last much longer than Gio lasted in Portland. I think at the beginning of the season, he was in the top 5 in terms of MLS longstanding coaches. And so it's rare to last a whole lot longer than this. And so I think you can even see a way in which he kind of lost the locker room in a way that's not even necessarily reflective of Gio. Gio's a good soccer coach. The Timbers couldn't have done the things that they did in his first 4 years if he wasn't a good soccer coach. And this is kind of, I think, pretty easily explainable just by a natural arc of things that happens. And to the extent that there's a lot of, for the Timbers going forward, reflection that needs to be done, it should be on whether they did the things and did all the things that they can and should have done in order to, if they wanted to keep this going for longer, in order to do that. But over the course of the last several months, and we've talked about it a lot, there's been a decent amount of flack given for the fact that we've talked about it a lot from a number of different places. It was just becoming untenable, and it was plain to see. And I think that is just sort of the truth that caught up with the club when they had to make this move. And it's a move that is sad in many ways because of the respect that Gio commands for the work that he did here. It feels like he deserves better than a mid-season dismissal, but it's also a necessary move. I mean, if this was going to be the decision at the end of the season, there's no reason to leave him flapping in the wind as a lame duck coach that doesn't have a connection with his locker room for the final 10 games. That doesn't serve him well. That doesn't serve the club well. That doesn't serve the players well. And I think that's why this move was made when it was. And so I hope that there's the perspective within the Timbers to be able to look at whether the club did the things that they needed to do to support Gio, a good, honest assessment of whether they put him in a good position. But I also think they're going to have some real decisions to make going forward. So it's a sad, it's a sad moment, as the end of an era often is. But I think that shouldn't get in the way of folks looking back and giving Gio the credit that he deserves for the job that he did while he was here in Portland, while recognizing that good things come to an end. And this is one of those good things that came to an end and that needed to.
And speaking personally to Gio the person, over the last 2 years, I've had a chance to work very closely with Gio. He's somebody that in my personal experience is a high character guy and someone who is very friendly, very relational with the media in general. Won't tell you everything. Will keep things close to the vest when he needs to. But that's part of the job. He always, it seems, sold the team at a higher price than maybe they were worth, particularly in the last 2 years, because in a lot of ways he had to. This was a team that underperformed by the club standards, by his standards. And yeah, I do think that his voice may have gotten stale over the years with some of the guys that he'd coached for a while. And I think that, when that happens, when you can't relate necessarily to those guys or aren't reaching those guys in that way, that sort of spreads around. And when you have those type of public fallings out with players, motivation decreases, and effort level can sometimes be a struggle. That game against Houston was a perfect example. Yeah, it becomes a slippery slope. They lose 5-0 on Sunday, and that, as we talked about off air prior to the podcast, that was probably one of the worst performances in the history of the Timbers. And it was, I think, driven by the fact that the motivation, under Gio was lacking. These guys, they didn't really play for him that night. The effort wasn't there. And it had not consistently been there for a while. There were some instances in which it was there, but there were way too many over the course of this entire season, frankly, where it wasn't. And this is the writing on the wall that we've been reading all year, and that I think just became too powerful to ignore. Right. And, all the stuff with Santi this year, all the issues with Ivacic over the last few months, the stuff with Eric, which had kind of, fallen into the background this year, not only because things seemed to be okay, but also, Eric got hurt. It adds up, and it's not something that can be ignored. But we also, and you talked about this, do have to acknowledge the resounding success that Gio had. Bringing that 2021 team in particular to MLS Cup was a serious achievement. Given where they were at certain points in that season, making it in 2018 with that group was impressive as well. The MLS's back run. It's proof, I think. Yeah, I actually think the 2020 Timbers are certainly in the conversation for the best Timbers team of the MLS era. In terms of the way they played, folks forget, not only did they win MLS's back, they dominated, absolutely dominated after MLS's back too. And were a little bit unfortunate to go out early in the playoffs, because otherwise they appeared poised for a pretty significant run. You'll remember that they only went out because of a really last-second goal by a then unknown FC Dallas striker named Ricardo Pepi, who we know a little bit more now, and who it turns out is a pretty good player. But that 2020 Timbers team was really, really good, and folks have sort of
I think, fairly and accurately classified Gio as a primarily counterattacking coach. But that 2020 team actually attacked in a pretty free-flowing, fun manner, and it was really fun to watch. So, I think you can, as you correctly point out, the 2018, 2021, 2020, those are 3 Timbers teams that really did things under his leadership. And that's not nothing. There are an awful lot of coaches who accomplish an awful lot less than that at this level.
Right. And I think this is a move with an eye on maintaining that level of competitive quality in MLS, right? We've talked on this podcast about the possibility that the Timbers are backsliding towards the middle of MLS, right? That, they're being surpassed by these teams that are spending more money, but are also, they have different leadership. They have different players, through their system, different academy systems. I mean, there's a lot of different factors that lead to it, but having a coach who has a fresh voice, fresh ideas, and a record of winning in the past is something that I think can and should be the priority for the club going forward as they seek out somebody new. Miles Joseph is filling in as an interim assistant now. We'll see how he performs and whether he makes the case for an internal promotion. But there have been a whole heck of a lot of internal promotions over the last few years for this club on both sides, the Timbers and the Thorns. So I don't think there's an appetite for that from fans, and whether that matters to the front office or not remains to be seen. But in terms of maintaining that level of competitive quality, speaking obviously before Miles Joseph has a chance to make his own case, it seems like going outside and finding somebody with a serious track record, a proven winner to lead this club into the future as it sort of resets the roster, goes a bit younger. Certain guys age out and new ones come in. Finding somebody like that to return to that level that Gio was able to bring this team to before these last 2 seasons is crucial. And it's going to be the difference between backsliding toward the middle of MLS and continuing to compete even after the rule changes happen and the floodgates in all likelihood open up financially.
I think this is, now the hard part starts. Frankly, for Ned Grabavoy and Merritt Paulson. Now is the hard part. The easy part, even though I'm sure it was emotionally very difficult, was sort of coming to this truth that this just wasn't working anymore with Gio. And they got there. But now this is going to be a tricky hire. Frankly, I think there's reason to have questions about how attractive the Timbers job is among MLS. I think it's not a hot take to say that it is not sort of among the premier jobs in the league anymore, certainly. And so, that raises questions about who exactly they're going to get as candidates. I think you look back at the track record, and I think you just alluded to this. They have hired for a lot of senior positions within the club, both on the Timbers and the Thorns side, over the course of the last couple of years. And they've gone almost exclusively, with the exception of Jack Dodd, who's, certainly a tier down from a head coaching hire. They've gone internal for all of them. And I think that gives rise to very reasonable questions about whether the club is able to attract top tier external talent to these kinds of roles. Now, I don't think it's fair to say that they absolutely cannot. I don't think we have the data, the ability to say that conclusively. But it at least gives rise to questions about that, right? Because if you're consistently hiring internally, in circumstances where it seems like there would be a pretty powerful interest to be bringing in sort of fresh ideas to a lot of these senior positions, you're going to give rise to questions about whether you're getting and attracting the kind of external talent that would be competitive. And I think that very much carries over. Those questions very much carry over to this job. At the same time, they need to make this hire quickly. And that's not something that they've done a great job of over the course of the last year or so. Certainly the hire of Dodd, which dragged on for months and months, comes to mind. But even promoting Ned Grabavoy into his full-time position from the interim job, that took 3 or 4 months from the time of Gavin Wilkinson's firing last fall. And so this isn't a situation where they can afford for that to happen, because they're going to be relying on this new head coach to be able to exert a pretty significant amount of influence over the decisions, the many decisions, I'll emphasize, that need to be made over the course of this next offseason. And if you're not getting around to making that hire until December, it's not going to happen. And you're going to be coming into 2024 then with a roster that is either being assembled late, which we've seen the perils of this year, or that's just not assembled to fit the manager whom you just hired. And that's not a good position to be in. So the Timbers need to be looking to make this hire in the next couple months before the offseason begins so that that person can be on board and can work directly with Grabavoy to make the moves necessary to get the roster in a place that the coach is comfortable with. And that's the position they find themselves in, which is, there have been a lot of names bandied about. Frankly, I think the names that I've seen on Twitter hit both ends of the unrealistic spectrum. Some folks have been speculating about Jason Kreis. That's not going to happen. And if that happens, it would be a scandal. He's not an MLS head coaching candidate at this point. And I don't think there's an MLS team who would hire him as their head coach. And if the Timbers somehow are, his success at Real Salt Lake was a long time ago. And he has a number of failures between now and then. If that's the level that the Timbers are going to be at, and I don't think it is, that would be quite depressing and not a good sign for the direction moving forward. Similarly, folks have been talking about, maybe Jesse Marsch. Is the Timbers job attractive to Jesse Marsch? I mean, I'm sure that call is going to be made to Marsch. I would be surprised, frankly, if he was particularly interested. Simply because, this is a guy who is on sort of the national team radar, who has ambitions of continuing to coach in Europe. I think there might be some MLS jobs that he would consider coming back to the States for, but are the Timbers one of those? I'd be surprised. And so, I think this is going to be a difficult search for the Timbers, and it's one that they're going to have to get right, and they're going to have to get it right sooner rather than later. And so it's a big job. It's a big job for Grabavoy and Paulson. And we'll see over the course of the next couple of months whether and how they're able to pull it off.
I did have somebody in the community, and this is purely and entirely speculative at this point, bring up the name Bob Bradley, because they claim that in July they spotted Bob Bradley at the Multnomah Whiskey Library in Portland. So that is maybe somebody that you could talk about in that sense, but who's to say? That's purely and completely speculative rumor.
I would expect that Bradley would be interested. I think you would want to take a very, very hard look at what happened at Toronto FC over the course of the last few years before deciding whether that's a good idea or not. Frankly, I think if I were to guess, I think this is going to be a hire that the Timbers are likely going to make from sort of the assistant ranks within MLS. And there are some good, talented assistant coaches who are ready for a shot at a head job, and you can find good coaches in that way. And so, that's not to say that the Timbers are not going to have talented candidates. I think they very well may. But, in terms of kind of the class of folks whom you would expect to be interested in this role and who are sort of realistic matchups, I think that's probably a good place to center your expectations in terms of who the next coach will be.
Right. And, this isn't to dismiss the idea of Miles Joseph becoming the coach either. I think that, fans would like to see somebody from the outside hired just simply because fresh face, fresh voice, fresh ideas. But, Miles Joseph has a Class A coaching license. He's somebody that's been an assistant in MLS for almost a decade. And, if he's able to cobble together some strong results down the stretch with this group, given how poor things have gone this season, he will probably have made a good case for himself. And you touched on the difficulty of potentially attracting people to this job, given everything that's gone on and swirled off field for this club in the last couple of years, and the issues that Gio himself faced in terms of not only roster build, but issues relating to players and locker room troubles. There's a lot there that makes it difficult. So it's definitely, I think, a possibility that Miles Joseph ends up being the person who gets this job. The question is, will he have done enough in these last 10 games to prove to people on the outside and even within the front office that he's the right type of guy?
One thing that is interesting and that I don't think we have answers to, so I'll just sort of present it as as an open question at this point is it's notable that Carlos Llamosa did not get the interim job. We don't know whether Llamosa is staying on. I think there are reasonable questions about that. He is very, very close with Gio. He's kind of Gio's guy, and so it wouldn't be surprising, and it would be natural, frankly, in this instance, if he would also move on from the club with Gio's dismissal. But that is certainly notable, because if you were to sort of go with the next guy up approach to the coaching job, he would have been it if he was going to be retained. And so I don't know that we have the answers to that yet, but I think it's a reasonable question about whether Llamosa will stick around and who exactly will remain on staff for Joseph in the interim.
Got anything to say about that 5-0 game in Houston other than what's already been said?
Not competitive from the first minute. I mean, folks, I saw some folks talking about, maybe it was the heat and that kind of stuff. Look, if the Timbers fought hard for 60 minutes and the game kind of overcame them in the last half hour as Houston was better able to manage those conditions, it would be one thing, and I think Gio would still be the head coach. They weren't competitive from the first minute of the game, and they were down 3-0 by the 14th minute of the game. That it was not competitive from the first minute. And I mean, that's just why we're here. It was a case of a team quitting and just punting on a game that was, by the way, a really important game. It was an extremely important game that the Timbers had lots of time to prepare for, and the team just did not show up, period. And that's why Gio doesn't have a job anymore because of that. And I think there is a lot of responsibility to be had and a lot of questions to be asked about the professionalism of the players who did not show up from the first minute of the game. And I think in addition, obviously that cost Gio his job. I think there are probably some players whose jobs it's going to cost as well. Under contract, obviously, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were some guys who we stop see getting selections and who, frankly, we see moved on from over the course of this winter, because of the performance this last weekend and performances like it.
And one moment that kind of got lost in the fray of that match was an injury, non-contact to Jaroslav Niškoda. He was obviously carted off the field. Looked to be something knee, hamstring related. We don't quite know the exact nature of his injury yet, and that sort of has also gotten lost in the noise of Gio's dismissal. But that may well have been the final game for Jaroslav Niškoda in a Timbers uniform, just given the struggles, the lack of performance, the money that they've paid him. He's probably one of those guys that you're talking about that at this point is likely to move on in the offseason. There's going to be a lot of movement, I think, this offseason for the Timbers. Ned has said so publicly. We're recording this podcast Tuesday morning at around 8:35 at this moment. Ned is speaking to the media later today in a couple of hours. So I'm sure that is front of mind for him. The person that they end up hiring, how they fit into his plan for the offseason, how they can work together collaboratively to build out this roster and make a lot of changes, because frankly, not only has Gio's voice maybe gotten stale for this group over the last couple of years, but the roster itself has run its course. And with minimal changes in the last couple of years beyond the additions of Juan Mosquera and Evander, who both, I think, are difference maker caliber players, but have, at least this season, not necessarily lived up to those billings in a lot of games, particularly Evander, who I think, if you could point to players who might have been lacking effort level in those
not even
last
close
few
to
games.
good enough.
Yeah.
Not even close.
Not good enough.
And frankly, so I think I said literally last week on the pod that he will be back for 2024, and that's probably right. But his performances are, if these continue, that's a question that's going to have to be asked, because it hasn't even been close to good enough from Evander. And maybe he's sort of part of, losing the locker room and those kinds of things. And he's going to have 10 games to prove that he's worth continuing the investment, the Timbers investment in him. But what we've seen from him over the course of the last 6 weeks or so, not even close. And the club is investing a lot in him. Invested a lot in terms of a transfer fee, and it's paying him an awful lot in wages. And he hasn't come even close to living up to his end of the bargain over the course of the last couple of months. And if that doesn't change, I think that's going to be a question for the offseason.
Right. And he's somebody that, this is becoming a question and becoming something that people are talking about, despite the fact that he is the engine through which their attack has had success. But I think that says a lot more about the lack of success that the attack has had than maybe the individual greatness and difference making that Evander has had. I think that there have been signs of visible improvement in spurts this season, especially, the connection that he has had with Frank Boley and other players. But beyond that, it has definitely felt underwhelming given the investment. And this next 10 games is going to be big, like you said, for him. And going into next year's even bigger. It's a show me year for Evander, regardless of who the next.
It's a show me 10 games for Evander. I mean, the bottom line is right now he's costed him more than he's contributing. For every spectacular free kick, now we're recently at 2 horrific giveaways, including one that set up the penalty in, what was it, the 3rd minute in Houston. A horrific giveaway deep in the Timbers' own end. And that is not the first time. In fact, it is very seriously not the first time that we've seen that from Evander recently. And the effort's not there. And he's costing him more right now than he's contributing. And so I think I agree 2024 is going to be a show me year if he returns. But these next 10 games are a show me 10 games for Evander. Because if this is what the Timbers can expect from Evander going forward, they should cut ties with him over the course of the winter. They should find a way to move him out. Because it's too much money, it's too much cap space, it's too much of a DP spot to give to a guy who's going to cost you more than he's going to contribute. And that's what he's doing right now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I do think that it would be pretty unlikely, even if he has a rough finish to the season, that, given the money they spent on that transfer fee, I'd be hard pressed to see Ned Grabavoy and Merritt Paulson sort of, do a 180 on that, just because of the investment, just because of the hype that they've put into him.
I tend to agree. But at some point, when is it good money after bad? I mean, and I think that's what he has to show over the course of these next 10 games. And look, a failed move like this is really bad for a guy's career. And Evander has ambitions of, and frankly, has the aptitude to achieve and accomplish bigger things than the Portland Timbers over the course of his career. But if this move fails, that is a difficult future to see.
Yeah, and we're talking about a very different direction for him in terms of the next move, rather than the one that he has in mind, which obviously is, maybe somewhere in Italy or moving into the Spanish league or to England or something that is a step up from MLS that is, a big transfer fee, a big chunk of change, a good bit more than 10 million is the hope, obviously, from the Timbers, so they can make a profit on this situation, but also because that's why you bring in these big players, right? Is to develop them, have them be one of your stars, and then flip them elsewhere.
And where the Timbers have gone wrong in the last couple of years is that they have held on too long to situations that weren't working. We just talked about it with Gio. We've talked about it a lot with Jaroslav Niezgoda. I think there are a few conversations to be had in terms of the Timbers doing that with players as well. And if they're learning from these things, then they very well could be in a mood over the course of this winter to look at a situation like Evander, if he doesn't show anything over the course of these next 10 games, and say, are we at risk of doing that again? And if a new coach comes in, looks at his performances over the course of the second half of 2023 and says, no, thank you, I think the Timbers could be in a spot where they'd say, all right, we need to move on. We don't want to put good money after bad here. And we need to move on to give this new coach the roster that they need to be successful.
There wasn't a whole lot of resilience shown on the field by the Portland Timbers on Sunday, but who did show a whole heck of a lot of resilience and toughness, total opposite end of the spectrum, were the Portland Thorns, who through smoky skies and a dog-so red card and a really difficult situation against the top team previously in NWSL, the Thorns pull out a 2-1 win over the North Carolina Courage with 10 players for almost 75 minutes of the game. Probably the best performance in an individual game, regardless of circumstance, that I have seen from the Thorns in the last 2 years, then this is a team that won the championship last season. Obviously, amazing moments like Crystal Dunn's game-winning goal against San Diego, the championship victory, other key wins under Rian Wilkinson and Mike Norris, but signature win for Mike Norris and these players, and the resilience shown to fight through the 10-person situation, to make the tactical changes needed to hold off North Carolina as much as they could. You know, I see that moment with the Hubley red card as sort of the axis that the game could have shifted a really bad way. And, you know, they gave up a goal right after it. It was a free kick that resulted from Hubley's foul that led to the goal that didn't initially look like a goal, but, you know, bounced off the underside of the crossbar. Very clear on replay that it bounced off the turf inside the goal. They're down 1-0, and Hannah Betfort, who has been phenomenal the last few weeks for the Thorns and is somebody who I think is indispensable as a substitute when you have Sophia Smith out there as your primary striker. Heck, player up top with Soph. See what the two of them can create together with Morgan Weaver, Hina Sugita when she gets back. Who knows? But Hannah Betfort scores that goal, ties at 1-1. And then in the second half, Sophia Smith comes on and doesn't even take 10, 20 seconds before she puts the ball in the back of the net. A very statement goal, let's say, to not only the NWSL that I am back, but perhaps to the national team that, hey, look at me. I'm a striker. I am unstoppable when I am on, and she's the MVP. It would be very surprising for me if in these last 6 games, even if she doesn't perform at the same level as she has to this point, which I think she will, it'd be surprising to me if she didn't win MVP, regardless of where the Thorns finish in the table. And now they're back at the top of the table. This was a huge, huge result for them with 16 games to go, 4 against, you know, the teams that are currently in the playoffs. It's a seriously big result and a virtuoso performance from the Thorns, who, you know, could very easily have laid down and nobody would have faulted them for losing a game like that or even drawing a game like that, considering the circumstance.
You know, unbelievable performance from the Thorns. And it was, in basically every capacity. I thought the central midfield and I thought the double pivot, which was new between Sam Coffey and Rocky Rodriguez, I thought they were incredible in this game. Basically erased the player disadvantages that they had because they were so good in pushing Carolina out of dangerous areas in the attack. I mean, Carolina had very few chances after going up a player. Very few. And it's not like the Thorns had a ton because obviously they're playing a player down. They really had to choose their spots to attack and to commit numbers into the attack. But the way that midfield sees control of the game, Olivia Moultrie is really good as well. I thought more on the creative side, although she put in the kind of really honest two-way work that you need when you go down a player like that. But I thought in sort of the creative side, Moultrie was very good in helping them sort of capitalize on the opportunities to attack that they had. And I thought Morgan Weaver's work rate and quality and dangerousness over the course of the game was exceptional. But for me, the sort of the central nugget, the core, the nucleus of that phenomenal performance was the work that Rocky and Coffey did to lock down central midfield and to make it so that the Thorns not only could defend well, but could attack out of that spot. And then you bring Sophia Smith in off the bench, right? Best player in the country. I agree with you. An increasingly runaway MVP candidate who, if her form continues over the course of the rest of the regular season, I think will be it's not quite a ride into Paris for her for MVP, but it's the more good games like that she has, that's going to become that. And so to be able to bring a match winner in like that in the late stages of a game and have her immediately win the match, that's awesome. But the overall performance, I just don't have the words. It was phenomenal. And, I think you're exactly right that the Dogs Are Red, which we still haven't seen a good replay on. So I don't want to jump up and down on it because we just don't have the ability to assess it fairly. But that was the real access point. And the Thorns sort of weathered a little bit of the storm in the 10 minutes or so after that. But they figured it out. They got the tactics right. They were really smart about making sure they were picking their spots to attack. And then when they did, and when the chances came, there weren't a ton of them, but when they did come, they made the most of them. And credit to Hannah Bedford, phenomenal first touch on a nice pass from Moultrie. Unbelievable first touch to put the ball in front of her, and then just a finish with a plum to silence the doubters, who I previously was among. Consider me silenced in terms of my Hannah Bedford doubt. And there just aren't enough words. Just top to bottom, unbelievably good performance from the Thorns. I hope that we keep seeing that double pivot going forward, because I think that is, as we saw, a much more stable defensive structure for the Thorns. And if they can stabilize their defensive structure, they have plenty of talent in the attack to go get the goals that they need to get. And I think we saw that in this game, even down a player, that they still had plenty of talent to go get the goals that they needed to get. And they were really, really difficult for one of the best teams in the league to break down, even though the Thorns were playing down a player. So great job to everybody, absolutely all around. I think Mike Norris, we asked a lot of questions about the tactics of the team going through the early parts of the summer and coming into the World Cup period. We didn't know whether they were going to be able to sort of solve the problems that just naturally come up over the course of a season. And I think this was a very strong first data point. And it's just the first data point. There need to be more. But it was a very strong first data point that, yes, they do have the sort of tactical noose within the coaching staff and within the players to solve those kinds of problems. And if that's the case, look out. Then yeah. we had our conversation last week about these next then 7, now 6 games, deciding whether this, being sort of a decision point as to whether this was going to be a dynasty or a flop. And if they're able to solve those tactical problems, it's looking a lot closer to the dynasty end of the spectrum than the flop end.
Yeah, absolutely. This result rests on the shoulders of those players who put in a really strong performance, and the word resilient keeps coming to mind. It's resilience has almost become a cliche with this team, right? With how much they have, overcome on and off the field in the last 2 years to achieve greatness and to be the best team in NWSL. Their goal differential blows everybody else out of the water this year. They are in a tight table, but they're a team that, to me, on paper and through results is the favorite to repeat. And it definitely is credit to Mike Norris for this performance as well. And I don't think that, either of us have really given him enough credit in recent weeks, but those questions were valid. He's a new coach with no previous experience. There were issues tactically that they had throughout the year that I think led to a lot of their leaky defensive performances, to their struggles. We talked a lot about Sam Coffey being left on an island, Emily Menges being left on an island. There were some really sketchy moments earlier in this season, whether the World Cup players were there or not. Now, getting all these star players back, they're all hungry. They've all got chips on their shoulders. No bigger than the chip on Sophia Smith's, a Rocky Mountain-sized chip on her shoulder in this last stretch of the season after what happened.
Show them.
Oh, yeah. She is, my God, she does not need us to tell her. Believe me, she knows it and has that motivation. And when you've got somebody like that, irrespective of the rest of this roster, which I think is near flawless in terms of its construction, when you've got somebody like that level of individual greatness, it just makes watching these games that much more fun for the neutral, for the fans, especially 22,000 people showing up with
on a smoky Sunday night.
Yeah. Like, that is indicative of what is so special about the soccer culture in this town, particularly with the Thorns. This is definitely something that Mike Norris should be proud of. The adjustments he was willing to make to pull Christine Sinclair, a legend of the sport, somebody that people consider the GOAT, to pull her off the field in the 22nd minute after that red card sent Hubley off, to get Megan Nally in there as the fourth defender. Sink was not happy about that.
But it was the move that needed to be made.
Yeah,
Sink is the luxury player in that lineup, and he needed to get his blocks of 4 back.
Yeah, he made the right move, and it was a risk, but not really a risk at the same time. Like, it paid off strongly in their ability to contain North Carolina for the rest of that game. Mike actually even let slip in the post game press conference that, you know, they felt they were in control of the game, and then he was like, "Oh well, maybe not in control, but you know, we were able to manage."
They were in control. They were
in control
by the second,
player down,
especially by the end of the first half and into the second half. They were in control of that game, which is, you know, it proves the correctness of the move he made to get Nally into the game and to sacrifice, unfortunately, because Sink was good in those first 15 minutes. She had a couple really nice through balls. It looked like the Thorns were really on the front foot of the game. Until the Dogs Are Red happened. But it proves the correctness of that move, and it proves the as you put it, resilience of the players and the intelligence of the coaching staff and the players, and figuring out the tactical problems that come from losing a player. And look, North Carolina was doing all the right things. They were looking to hold the ball deep and to play big switches. Those are exactly the kinds of things you want to do when you're a player up, because they expose the flanks, which is where you're most likely to get the player advantage. And they were getting their fullbacks into the attack. They were doing all of those things. They were doing the textbook things that you do to try to take advantage of having a player up. And it didn't matter because the Thorns were all over it. And so, you know, I think that they pushed all the right buttons. And that's really, really hard to do. There's a reason why it wasn't an irrational thought. If you thought like I did after Tyler Lucy put that goal in, nice free kick, by the way, to an old friend.
Really nice.
Old friend. Don't have to do that against the Thorns. Just let's stay friends. But yes. Really nice goal from Tyler Lucy, by the way. But you were not wrong. If you, like me, thought in that moment, this is probably over. A goal down, a player down, this is probably over.
Yeah, with 75 minutes.
75 minutes to play against a really freaking good team. The North Carolina Courage are legit. And even though they were missing a couple players like the Thorns were, they are still legit. And that's why this was, you know, I agree with you, one of the best performances that I've seen in Thorns history. But actually the quote that from the post-game press conference that most stuck out to me was from the most powerful person in Portland soccer right now. And that's Sophia Smith, who is indisputably the most powerful person in Portland soccer right now. And it was when she sort of went out of her way to say that she loves playing here. And as she was saying that, I was basically screaming, give her what she wants. Give her anything she wants. Anything she asks for, give it to her. Because the Thorns urgently need to lock her down to an extension. And as we're talking about dynasties, this is something, as we've talked about before, this is a now problem. This isn't something that they can put off for a few months. This is a now thing that they need to do, maybe even before the Timbers hire a new coach. But because of where Sophia Smith is in her contract with 1 year remaining, she is the most powerful person in Portland soccer. And in how she was talking, it certainly at least sounded to me like she was open to the idea of staying here for longer than just the end of this season or just the end of next season. And if that's the case, give her what she wants. So, because look, I mean, there are going to be players that have to change in Portland over the course of the next few years because of just Christine Sinclair, where Crystal Dunn is in her career, where and her contract, by the way, where Becky Sauerbrunn is in the course of her career. There are going to be some changes in the Thorns team over the course of the next few years. If your core remains people like Sophia Smith and Sam Coffey and Morgan Weaver, you're going to be able to navigate those changes because you have a dynasty core. So that was in the post-game press conference the most interesting moment for me, because if she is open to staying here, give her if she wants a training facility, give her a training facility. Whatever Soph says, Soph gets. Get that contract done and get it done now.
Yeah, I thought about that too during that match when she came on immediately and scored. I was like, this is a next level type of person, right? Somebody that comes around once in a generation in a sport. And at 23 years old has already ascended to the level of being one of the best players in the world, and in your words, the best player in the country. I think it's time for the NWSL to be creative in the ways that MLS was in bringing in a player at the tail end of their career who is of that caliber in his sport, and that is Lionel Messi. be creative with this contract. I think that, run Soph the max, give her the most amount of money that is allowed under the collective bargaining agreement between the league and its players association. But I think she is somebody that it is worth going further with. She is somebody that you need to talk about, tying in endorsement deals with, that you need to talk about making as part of her contract, apparel and TV deal money and potentially future ownership stake in the team, particularly given that the Thorns are about to change owners in the next few months. And
that might be a difficult one to sort out right now in particular, but
yes. And she's very young. So, maybe that waits until later in her career, but these are the things I think need to be part of the conversation. Yes, the extension has to happen. Yes, it has to be the absolute max you are allowed to give her under salary rules. But there's got to be a whole heck of a lot of bonuses in there for somebody like this, because not only do you want to secure that contract and make sure that she stays here, make sure that next year is not played as a contract year for the best player
absolutely
in
cannot
NWSL.
be.
You can't let that happen.
Organizational malpractice,
I believe
if they don't get an extension done in the next few months.
Yes, and I believe that Karina LeBlanc is hard at work on this, behind the scenes, and has had these discussions with Sophia's management, and I believe it will happen. The question is, what does it look like, and how does it reflect what Soph has meant to this club already? She's somebody that you can categorize as a club legend, despite this only really being her second year of consistent and primary contribution. Both of these years, by the way, likely will end up with her being the MVP of the league. Keep her around, man. Don't let her be tempted by this, let me go play in Europe and get some money tossed at me by the endless pockets of Chelsea ownership. Don't let her go somewhere else in NWSL where, they are willing to be more creative than you are with her contract and what she deserves as a player. This has got to be a huge priority. And we've talked about this before. And it's not just her. You want to keep Morgan Weaver around. She's somebody that I'm sure other teams are licking their chops thinking, oh man, does Portland have enough resources to keep her around with Soph, with Sam Coffey, with these other players?
They're going to have space with these other players who are going to be coming off the books over the course of the next few years. They're going to have space. Yeah, I mean, I think this is fairly simple. The driving principle of these negotiations and finishing them is what Soph wants, Soph gets. That's it.
No doubt.
If the Thorns or the league aren't willing to give Soph what Soph wants, then one of the best players in the world is going to deservedly leave the league. And so they should be willing to give Soph what Soph wants. What Soph wants, Soph gets.
And the league is in a different place than it was at a time when Sam Kerr left too. There is so much more money and investment and futures for this league in terms of finances than there were at that time. There is more leeway, I think, to be creative, particularly given that a new TV contract is going to be negotiated in the coming years and months. It's got to be creative. That's my perspective on it. And she deserves that. So I'm excited to see what that looks like when that potentially happens. And I think it would be a collective and enormous sigh of relief on the part of Thorns fans to know that she's locked in for the next few years.
Ain't no dynasty without Soph.
Ain't no dynasty without Soph. And even if she's locked up and, 3 years from now, she wants to go on loan somewhere for a year, by that 3 years, maybe you've won 4 championships with Sophia Smith and she's got a couple more MVPs under her belt. Any and all of that is not possible if you don't lock her in beyond the 2024 season.
What Soph wants, Soph gets. Get it done.
Absolutely. Speaking of the Thorns, we have Janine Beckie on today as a guest. My conversation with her will be coming up after the break here, but that'll wrap it up for Chris and I today on our discussions on everything PTFC. Thank you, Chris, as always, for your analysis, for your candor on these subjects. Appreciate it. It's a weird time. Once again, things are never simple. They're never easy. They seem always to be pretty complicated around this club over the last couple of years, but we've navigated through it all. So After this break, we will have Janine Beckie on to chat about the World Cup, about the greatness of Sophia Smith and her other teammates, and how her recovery is going, everything else. So stick around. Thanks for joining us. And we're back on Soccer Made in Portland, joined today by a special guest, Portland Thorns and Canada national team star Janine Beckie. Janine, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time and happy to have your analysis today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
For sure. Let's just start with a question that a lot of folks, in the Portland soccer community have been asking. How are you doing? How's the recovery going for you? Mentally and physically, obviously it's a big challenge to come back from this type of injury. How are you doing?
Well, I appreciate everyone's concern and interest in how I'm doing. That's very nice. I'm doing really well. Things are coming along on time. We're being a little bit more conservative with my return just because we have deemed this as a season-ending injury. So there's really no rush for me to get back and enforce coming back sooner than I should. So I would say I'm probably a little bit over halfway there, maybe just about halfway back to what would be considered 100%. So yeah, I'm doing well. Going to start running here in the next couple of weeks, which is a big milestone. And I'll be working hard in the off season and ready to hit the ground running come next preseason.
Well, congratulations on that milestone. That's an exciting moment for anybody to finally get back to the business of running and doing all the things that soccer players love to hate to love to do, I guess.
Yeah, it is weird to think that the one thing that we have to do relatively consistently, I have not done in 5 months. So it's definitely going to be interesting, but thank you. It's definitely a big milestone. So I'm looking forward to continuing the progress.
And, through this process, you've done a lot of your recovery here in Portland. I'm wondering, how your Thorns teammates have supported you through the process and what they've been like.
Unfortunately, this is an injury that a lot of my teammates have experience with, and that seems to be pretty common in the women's soccer community. So from that point, it's nice to have people around that understand what I'm going through and have been there themselves. But this team has been incredibly important in my recovery, more so from a mental standpoint than physically. They're obviously incredibly encouraging. We have an insane staff behind the scenes who I've worked with very closely, from our athletic training team to our physical therapist to our sports scientist and performance coaches. So I'm really lucky to be at a club that, takes those things really seriously and has a performance staff that operates at the highest level. And then to have a locker room of the type of people that we do with the Thorns, it's just always a really positive environment to be in. It's a environment where people operate at the highest level and are, just high performers in general. So it's really encouraging and motivating to be that type of environment and still feel like I'm part of a team that's chasing another championship. So it's definitely pushing me to want to be back on the field. It's really hard to be on the sidelines and watch a team as talented as ours and not be able to be a part of that this season. But I've learned so much. There's been so much perspective, and this team just keeps me really positive.
Right. And, that result on Sunday, I think, is indicative of a lot of what you are talking about in terms of the togetherness and the, in many ways, resilience of this group. To lose Hubley in the 14th or so minute with a dog so red card, and to come back and win that game 2-1 after going down 1-0 right after that. What was your perspective on that incredible night in front of 22,000 in Portland?
It's funny because I've been on the bench in those kind of situations before. I've been on the field in those kind of situations, but I haven't been watching so removed from my team in that kind of situation. So it was new for me, and it was myself, Becky Zarbot and Crystal Dunn. We're all sitting next to each other up in the suite watching the game, and we were just trying to figure out what the rules were, because the rules have changed so much. We're like, okay, so if it's a penalty, does she get a yellow card? And then he goes to the video review board and it's all of a sudden a red card. And we were like, what is happening? And then they score on the free kick. It wasn't a penalty. Everyone was confused by that. And it was just like this double whammy of like crap for our team. And so you're just sitting there like so helpless. And it just like, I feel so bad for Kelly because she's obviously such an important part of our team. And she was just so disappointed to have, she really felt like she let the team down. But it's just so funny because, like I've never had a red card in my career, knock on wood. And she was like, I just really thought I was never going to get one. And I was like, I feel like that's what everybody thinks. And then you think like, oh, I've let the team down so much. And at the end of the day, people are just like, it is what it is, like not let down. But yeah, she's just such a pillar of our team. And then to watch the team just absolutely crush it for the rest of the game with 10 players, like this team is definitely got a flair for the dramatic. We like to make things interesting. So maybe that's why we have so many fans, because people are just like, you never know what you're going to get when you go to a Thorns game. And, to have made more history this weekend being the first team to get a red card in the first half and win the game is, I think it just speaks to the character and resilience in this group. And it's something that's so deeply instilled in the players that we have on this team. So yeah, I'm not sure there's a lot of teams that could have done what we did and really truly dominate the game with 10 players.
And, a big part of the next few weeks for the Thorns is going to be reintegrating the World Cup players. Sink is back from Team Canada. You've got Sophia Smith and Crystal Dunn returning. Becky Sauerbrunn, who would have been at the World Cup were it not for her injury, working her way back. Hina's coming back. Rocky's back, and she was huge on Sunday night, as many people have pointed out. Just your thoughts on bringing those folks back after such an emotional and intense tournament, and one that the feeling of coming back from a big tournament and having those physical and mental tolls to work through. What's that going to be like?
Yeah, I've seen both sides of it now. It was really strange to be here during a major tournament where, bar my injury, I hope that I would have been in Australia with the team, but to have been back here and see how the team operated without those players, I just have to give so much credit to the staff and the players that were here, because they really took the pressure and, had some difficult performances and difficult results, but really stuck together. And for players that maybe didn't see as many minutes when those players were here at the beginning of the season, to be called upon immediately and be asked to have an impact that quickly is really difficult as an athlete. And it's really difficult to kind of give yourself that confidence that all of a sudden you're going to be called upon to perform for this team. And this team has really high expectations. I think that's why we're so successful, because we're not content with losing or dropping points at any point in the season. So I was really proud to see the work that the team that was here put in, but there's absolutely no doubt that getting these players back has been so important for us. You said it. Rocky was amazing on Sunday. She just brings so much composure and experience to the midfield, and I thought she was really, really key in that game. And then, just a weird, strange turn of events for Sink. Unfortunately, I had to be her to come off to put another defender on. And I know she probably wasn't happy with that situation, but she's such a team player. I'm sure she was screaming her head off on the bench. And then you look at someone like Soph, who it's just like, it's inevitable. She's inevitable that she's just going to come in and make that kind of difference. And I think she needed that from a confidence perspective. It's really difficult to come into a high performance environment right off the back of major tournament disappointment, let alone Soph's first major tournament. So to have her back like that and for her to score literally on her second touch of her return is exactly what she needed. And I think it's just going to springboard her for the rest of the season. We hope to see Hina really soon. Everybody knows what she brings to the team. And then you have Crystal and Becky, who are just like, they speak for themselves, just leaders, veterans, people with so much experience, and who are both so important to this team. So I hope that both of them are back on the pitch as soon as possible. But yeah, safe to say we're all very happy to have all of them back. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this team, push towards the end of the season. We have that number one spot. It's ours to lose now. So I hope that the team really can hold on to that and perform, with 11 players, as well as they did on Sunday for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. And, in pursuit now of a second consecutive championship, and something Sink mentioned before the season is wanting to be, Shield winners and repeat champions. That would be the first time that that's happened in the history of this club. Obviously would be a dynasty definer potentially for this group. Your thoughts on Team Canada after this World Cup. Obviously Sink and Rocky were the first two players to return, and that was a group stage exit for both of them. What was your perspective on what Canada might have been missing in that group stage, and the difficulty of advancing in a tournament like that?
It was just such a wild tournament from start to finish, and I think I felt watching from a distance just like super heavy with that early of an exit. But when you look at the tournament in general, it was just like this mass exodus of top ranked teams way sooner than anyone would have expected them to leave. And on one hand, it's obviously incredibly disappointing to see, my team bow out so early, but also what an incredible kind of showing for women's soccer that the gap has closed so much between teams that even back in 2019, it was more of a really dominant group of teams, and then kind of that second tier group who would give some teams some challenges, but for the most part, those higher ranked teams had those performances pretty much nailed down, and we're just not seeing that anymore. And I think that that's really exciting. Like I said, obviously disappointing that it affected my team the way that it did, but it's hard for me to comment on that because I wasn't there. I don't know what was going on in the background. Similarly to the US, I think a lot of people will speak to, what they think went wrong, but no one really knows unless you're in the environment, what's going on, what's going on with individual players, what do they have going on in their lives. And then we had quite a few, younger players who were relied upon in a way that they maybe haven't before. And that's difficult for everyone. And I really do think it was just like, I just felt like it was so uncharacteristic of our team to obviously exit that soon, but to have some of the difficulty that we did. And I'll be really interested in the coming months, hopefully getting reintegrated back into the team to kind of, learn what was going on, learn from the tactical footage and really look at it and dissect it. I know our staff has already begun that process of watching those games and looking at what could be different, and whether it's, it wasn't the right formation for that group of players, or, whether it was individual performances that maybe weren't good enough. I really don't know. But yeah, it was really, really hard for me to watch. They could have won all 3 games and been brilliant, and it would have still been really hard for me to watch. So, it is what it is. I think it's a group of people who are so dedicated and will already be looking forward, and a lot, like you said, are already back in their club environments, getting back to it. And we've got 2 really important games coming up in just about a month's time to qualify for Paris in 2024. So yeah, I mean, it's no rest for the weary, right? Like, we just got to get on with it and get back to it. And I'm excited to hopefully be back in the environment and have a bit more of an influence than I was able to in this World Cup.
Right. And I think you touched on something really important in that, a lot of people talk about the growth of the game in terms of popularity when they discuss women's soccer, but it seems that, this World Cup in particular showcased that the quality and the parity of the game globally is on an uptick as well. What do you attribute, or to what do you attribute that kind of sea change that's happening in the sport, where all these new teams are becoming contenders or pulling these upsets and sort of changing the landscape?
Yeah, I mean, Spain's probably the perfect example of that. They've been so dominant on the youth level the past couple of years. I don't know if it was the under 15 or 17. They won 2 youth World Cups, the last 2 youth World Cups. And then some of those players have now fed into their senior team. You look like someone like Salma Parello, who was absolutely incredible in this World Cup, scored 2 winning goals in the knockout rounds at just 19 years old. And I think what we're seeing is players all around the world getting to this level and being successful on this level younger. So, I mean, you look at someone like Sophia Smith, she just turned 23, which is insane, has already had so much experience at the national team level, maybe not at major tournaments, but she's been on the team for a long time, has been playing on the team for a long time. and is finding so much success in the club game already at such a young age. And then you look around the world at someone, like Lauren Hemp, who is still so young, but is having such a big influence on the game. And I would attribute that to investment for sure, which we still have a long way to go. But a lot of these countries and clubs are investing in players younger to develop them. And then I think it's about, women's players truly believing that this is a sport that should be operating at, this level, at the professional level. There's opportunity around the world for females to be playing professionally younger more than ever before. And I think it's such an interesting and sometimes really frustrating parallel, because we're seeing like so much excitement and so much more investment and like the most viewers, the most attended World Cup, like probably definitely the most competitive World Cup. Yet we still have so far to go. And so, whether I'm feeling pessimistic or optimistic, it changes day to day about women's soccer. It's definitely, after that World Cup, I'm definitely feeling more optimistic than I ever have. So I think the conversation needs to stay really at the forefront of people's minds and about investment and how, women's soccer is the place to invest right now. And if there hasn't been enough evidence of that, then I don't think people are paying attention.
Absolutely. And you said it, the platform is growing for other nations to speak out on these issues of equity in the way that the U.S. women's national team sort of trailblazed initially with their fight for equal pay. Obviously, Canada is at the forefront of those discussions, Spain and Jamaica, just to name a few. I mean, what do you make about how that landscape is shifting and maybe the increased focus and pressure that now exists publicly on federations to create equitable conditions and invest in the game?
It's a tough time to be a sporting federation in women's soccer, to be honest. And I think what's amazing is that players are finally calling out federations for maybe, in some cases mistreatment, in some cases lack of fair treatment, and in some cases just historical absence of treatment, to be honest. I think it really ranges depending on what federation you're talking about. I mean, everybody's seen the Spanish Federation in the news in the last couple of days, which is so utterly disgusting what happened. And I really, I feel for those players, and I really hope that, the governing, whoever is, some of it is involving head people at the federation, but I really hope those that have influence step in and make that right, because that was so wrong what happened and what continues to happen in that federation. And it's pretty amazing that they were able to win a World Cup with all of that going on. But I think you said it, the US trailblazed this conversation, and those players, I have the pleasure of, sitting next to one of them in the locker room, in Becky Sauerbrunn, and just some of the conversations that her and I have had just about how a lot of things that they did in their fight for equal pay have encouraged myself and those working on that from a Canadian perspective, and just giving examples of, oh, you guys did this, and we use that as an example in this case. And I think what it's created is such an incredible community in women's soccer, where we all know exactly what it's like to have this fight and to feel the impact of the lack of funding, or the impact in the mistreatment, or seeing our men's teams get certain things. And, it's the same thing. Sometimes I'm really optimistic. Sometimes I'm pessimistic. There's so many trolls out there that are just like, well, how much money do you make? And I'm like, come on, guys, like, look at this World Cup. Look at what the revenue generated was. And it's almost like people expect that to happen overnight, and it just doesn't happen overnight. And so I think this is one of those things that, unfortunately, we're still in that space as women's soccer players where we're having to do the fighting. And like I said, we've created such an amazing community where players all around the world feel so inspired and empowered to have this fight in their own federations. And like I said, it's a tough time to be a federation, because you have players who feel empowered to stand up for themselves and speak up for themselves and what they need to be successful. And I hope that federations that maybe weren't as successful at this World Cup will wake up and say, we need to invest in these players. We need to invest in the youth. And for those that were successful, I hope they still look and say, what more can we be doing to help our players? And what can we continue to do to make sure that our team gets to this same place come the next major tournament? And if all those federations are having that kind of growth mindset and what more can we do, I think really the game's only going to continue to grow.
Right. And, this is a battle being waged on two simultaneous fronts for players, right? It's fighting both labor fights and against cultural, deep-seated, misogynistic attitudes for not only people that are in positions of power, but who are, fans of the sport, who are, outsiders or people with influence. And I think that that's something that maybe most fans might not fully grasp yet, although there are many who are extremely vocal in their support for the players and their continued fight for just equal treatment at the very base level. And then beyond that, a much greater investment in the sport that players believe they deserve. The Spain thing is interesting to me and unfortunate in so many ways, because it's not only leadership dismissing player concerns on an institutional level, but also engaging in this bizarre and misogynistic behavior in a public setting, which I think is drawing a lot of attention to these issues, but should not be the only time people pay attention to this, right? I mean, these are labor concerns first and foremost, but also simultaneously ones of cultural acceptance.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, those two things live in parallel in a lot of these circumstances. And, you have to give credit to fans in this space, fans that choose to be vocal about their support of us in this fight. And thank you to all of those people, because it's so encouraging to see voices speak up that probably in the past would have been discouraged to do so, and to face all of the still what seem to be so many voices trying to drown out this fight. And so thank you to all of those people who continue to vocally share their support. But it's just so bizarre to me, because you have people at the top of the Spanish Federation doing these things at a point in the tournament where the most eyes are on you. And not to say that should ever be dismissed behind closed doors, but imagine what's happening behind closed doors. If someone's willing to do that in front of a World Cup final audience, it absolutely blows my mind that there was any comment that was a normal gesture, or that there wasn't, I just can't imagine how uncomfortable that made players feel in what should be the most celebrated moments of their careers. And so I really hope that those players were able to and continue to celebrate that properly. But this needs to be handled as it should. An apology is not good enough. And yeah, it's just really, really unfortunate that moment happened in the midst of a team winning the World Cup. So it's one of those things where I'm glad that so many eyes were on it to see it, and to not to just express how utterly terrible that is. But I also feel really, really sad for those players, because you would never want anything to overshadow the fact that you just, excelled at the pinnacle of the sport and won the biggest tournament and the biggest trophy that there is to win. And unfortunately, in the same span of time, you're dealing with that.
And, those in Portland may not be familiar with the situation between players and the Canada Soccer Association. How would you best articulate what players are seeking in that discussion, and maybe where things currently stand in those negotiations as they're ongoing?
Yeah, for sure. This has been something that us as players have been engaged in for, over, about 2 years now, more intensely. We've been in negotiation with our federation all the way back in 2016 when we first started negotiating collective bargaining agreements. And it wasn't really until the men's team found their success in their run to qualifying for the 2022 Men's World Cup that we really started to see the discrepancy in treatment between the two teams. And we have a great relationship with a lot of the men's players, which has been really helpful in just kind of learning how things operate on their side, what kind of payment structure they have, which has historically been very different than ours. And it wasn't until 2016 when we began to negotiate collective bargaining agreements that we were paid at all by the federation, which is unfortunately the reality for a lot of federations around the world and their women's team. And when I say we got paid, it was like nothing, essentially, which I think there's a lot of an argument for, you shouldn't be paid to play for your national team. It's an honor. And I definitely don't disagree, but we're at a place in the game where it's possible. And players should be, in my opinion, compensated for the job that they do on the world stage, especially if they're successful in that. And so, yeah, it kind of all started when we started to see those discrepancies and we spoke up about it. And we've been in negotiation for a better pay structure, a better collective bargaining agreement for some time. And it really kind of came to a point at the She Believes earlier this year, where we really took a stand and just demanded better based on the way that we saw our men's team be prepared for the 2022 World Cup. And we, felt like and definitely stood firm in the fact that we deserved the same in the lead up to the 2023 Women's World Cup. And so it's a very complicated and very deep-seated issue and still ongoing. Definitely moving in the right direction, I would say. There's still a lot of frustration and still a lot of things that have yet to be agreed upon, but we did sign an interim compensation agreement for 2023. But for us as the players, the message that we wanted to get across and that we didn't want to be, misconstrued or have people get the wrong idea about is this: it really has never been about the money that we get paid individually. Obviously, that's important in its own place, but it was really about equal treatment and equal resource, because we were both going after the same thing, and there should never be an excuse that a women's team gets treated lesser than a men's team for doing the same thing. And so, that's resources like staffing, travel standards, access to the right training pitches, weight rooms, just everything that you need to be a high-performing athlete and a player and a team that's performing, playing in a World Cup. So, like I said, there's a lot to it, and I could sit here for probably another hour to try and explain everything, but I'm optimistic that, however long it takes, we are in the fight for the long haul, and we will, we're fighting to create a better situation for the future of Canadian soccer. And there's so many young girls and boys who deserve the best national team situation for their time to play on these teams. So we're very much aligned with our men's team in this whole thing, and we'll continue to have the conversations and fight where we need to. And, hopefully come September, back that up on the field.
Absolutely. Finishing on maybe more of a lighter note than some of the heavier subjects that we've gone into, and I appreciate your candor and analysis on those. I think it's excellent to have somebody articulate that. In your recovery time in the last few months, have there been any fun trips or activities that you've engaged in? What are some things that fans might not know about you, like what you're into off the field? What can you share?
It's a good question. I think it's been such an interesting period of time. I was having this conversation with Crystal the other day, as an athlete, as a professional athlete, it's not like you get opportunities often to go to your staff and be like, you know what, I just need a break for a couple of months. I just need to get away for it doesn't happen. It's the same thing in work. You just don't take months off at a time. And so when a long-term injury comes around, not that anyone would ever want that, but it gives you an opportunity to work on things that maybe you can't work on in the midst of a season, or have a different perspective about something. And so perspective has been such an important thing for me in this journey. Like I'm physically stronger than I've ever been because I'm not running like 7 miles every weekend, which has been really cool for me. But off the field, just getting the opportunity to spend time with my loved ones. I had to spend more time around family around my surgery just to have the support, having people help take care of me, which it's incredibly hard for me to ask for help. So that was a big learning. But when you're on crutches for 5 weeks, there's quite a few things you can't do. I have so much gratitude and love and respect for my family, and my boyfriend and his family were absolutely amazing. I've done a lot of cooking. I love to cook. Everybody knows me. I love to drink coffee. So I've probably been over caffeinated for 90% of this recovery, but that's been helpful because then I have all the energy. I haven't really, taken any big trips or done anything. My intention was to go to Australia and potentially be with the team, but it didn't work out. But yeah, it's so cliche to say everything really does happen for a reason. And I've seen that time and time again in this injury. And I'm just really excited to have a renewed mindset, and honestly, a really different mindset when I get to play the game again. Because it really, things are cliche for a reason, right? Because they're true. And it's like, you really never know when it can all be taken away from you. So I'm just really excited to be able to play again, but I'm also really, really happy and excited about a lot of other areas of my life that have shown me that there's much, much more to this than playing soccer.
Janine Beckie of the Portland Thorns and Canada women's national team, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
That'll wrap it up for us on Soccer Made in Portland. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerMaidenPDX, at Chris Rifer, at Ryan T. Clarke, and at Janine Beckie. Make sure to like us, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review if you so choose, and tune in next week and we'll have more to chat about on the Timbers and Thorns. Thanks for joining us.